Welcome to the March edition of This Month in Payroll for 2024. I'm Rowan Geddes, National Leader of PwC's Payroll Advisory and Operations Practice. And after a hectic start to the year, I'm pleased to advise that this month we're taking a breath to regroup as the regulators start to process the practical implications of the suite of changes introduced over the last 18 months via the Closing Loopholes legislation and the Secure Jobs Bill. This month we will focus on the takeaways from last month's release of gender pay gap data by WGEA for all Australian employers with over 100 employees. Two cases arising from the recent legislation changes, a work value case and a same job, same pay application. And the latest areas of focus in the Modern Award Review, worker carers and right to disconnect. Last month, for the first time, WGEA publicly released gender pay gap data for almost 5,000 Australian employers with over 100 employees. The resultant media coverage was extensive. Over half of the employers have a gender pay gap of more than 9%, and the national median pay gap was 19% for total remuneration, base salary plus bonuses, overtime and allowances. Individual companies were called out by WGEA where they had the largest pay differentials, as well as industries such as construction, which has the largest gender pay gap of 31.8%. Followed by the financial and insurance services industry and the professional, scientific and technical services industries, which all recorded a 26% gap. It is not surprising to note that employers in male-dominated industries are more likely to have larger gaps, whereas the accommodation and food services industry has the lowest gap at 2%. The reporting of individual gender pay gap numbers represents a seismic shift in the environment as it allows employers and employees to compare their wage gap against their peers and also their past gender equity commitments. The level of coverage that the GPG information release has generated has led to a need for employers to consider how to respond from an internal and external communications perspective, and to consider what strategies can be put into place to address the pay gap. Even employers with relatively low GPGs need to create or revisit their diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, because without maintenance, this gap will start to rise. There are many structural reasons why a GPG may develop, and these can't all be fixed simply by increasing women's pay or hiring more women. For example, the composition of a workforce can skew the GPG. Workforces with a skew of men in leadership positions or a skew of women into entry-level, part-time or casual roles are likely to struggle to reduce their GPG. In addition, the WGEA calculation isn't based simply on base salaries and bonuses, it also considers overtime and allowances. And in this regard, shift equity, effective rostering, should be considered. Is there unconscious bias and discrimination built into who is asked to do overtime or receive shifts outside of normal hours where those shifts attract greater penalties? There's other structural areas to consider too, such as the provision of access to flexible working arrangements without penalising career progression, addressing biases and reward strategy, the manner of measuring performance and the value sought to drive a career progression. Another learning from the release of the gender pay gap data is the importance of the accompanying employer's statement. This document, which was voluntary this year, is vital in helping employers strategically communicate the reasons for the gender pay gap and the actions they are taking to address it. It also enables employers to think beyond regulatory compliance and use the publication of their GPG as an opportunity to promote their approach to gender pay equity, pay transparency and diversity and inclusion, helping to differentiate their offering to employees, customers and the wider community. And this differentiation is already becoming important, as the Minister for Women, Senator Katie Gallagher, announced this month that, as part of the Working for Women strategy, the government will introduce a requirement for businesses with more than 500 employees to commit to and achieve workplace targets against at least 3 of the gender equality indicators in order to win government work. The 6 gender equality indicators are the gender makeup of an employer's board, the gender makeup of an employer's workforce, equal pay, flexible working arrangements, workplace consultation on gender equality, and the efforts taken to prevent and address sexual harassment. The WGEA changes to gender pay gap reporting were introduced as a measure to increase transparency, generate stakeholder engagement, and pressure and inform investment decisions. The initial responses to the reporting indicate that the changes are having the desired effect. The annual reporting obligations will provide a further data point, as stakeholders will have the ability to evaluate employer trends each February. Given this change in the environment, employers should not view GPG reporting as simply another level of reporting to contend with. Rather, we encourage employers to embrace the release of the data, develop strategies to respond to it, and use the resultant communications as an opportunity to realise real benefits from both an employee value proposition and a business value proposition. Now to two cases that are testing aspects of the new IR environment introduced by the Secure Jobs Better Pay Act and the Closing Loopholes legislation. The first is work value and gender inequality. One of the changes introduced in the Secure Jobs Bill was to empower the Fair Work Commission to vary modern award wage rates, where the work value, the amount that employees should be paid for doing a particular kind of work, in an industry has been undervalued because of assumptions based on gender. Awards that have been identified as potentially being impacted include aged care, nurses, SHADs, educational services, hair and beauty, general retail, legal services, and animal care. The Fair Work Commission has commissioned studies to support its review of gender-based inequities in these awards as part of the next annual wage decision. However, an early indication of direction was felt this month in a Fair Work Commission decision that covered the Aged Care Award, the Nurses Award, and the SHADS Award. This decision, which is still subject to stakeholder comments, awarded direct care workers further increases up to an additional 13.5% in their minimum wage, on top of a 15% increase in November of 2022. The FWC bench has given parties until April 26th to comment on the draft determination, while the federal government will have until April 12th to make submissions on the timing of the operative date and the phasing in. While the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as issues arising from understaffing, were factors in the size of the increase, it was a commentary regarding work value which was particularly illuminating, because it provides an early indication of the Fair Work Commission's thinking when it comes to gender-based inequalities. In its judgment, the FWC stated that a further substantial increase is warranted in our view because the federal award rates of pay for personal care workers, home care workers, and nursing assistants have never properly comprehended the exercise of the invisible skills involved in aged care work. Skills of interpersonal and contextual awareness, verbal and non-verbal communication, emotional management, and dynamic workflow coordination. This represents a continuation of the history of treating the skills exercised in female-dominated industries and occupations as merely feminine traits and not representative of the work value, which is at the heart of the gendered undervaluation of work. This is still a draft determination, and distinctions can be drawn between the value of invisible skills in this group of industries versus other industries. Notwithstanding, it is evident from the Fair Work Commission's wording that there will be a significant focus on gender inequalities as we approach this year's annual wage review, so we will watch this space. A second area that is about to be tested is the same job, same pay legislation. Under the first tranche of the Closing Loopholes changes, passed in December last year, labour hire employees and their unions, working for a host employer under a supply of labour contract, were given the right to apply to the Fair Work Commission for an order that they must be paid under the same conditions as employees working under a host employer's enterprise agreement. This month, the Mining and Energy Union lodged the first same job, same pay application for WorkPack labour hire workers who perform work for host employer Batchfire Resources Callide Mine. The application contends the work performed by WorkPack employees falls within the coverage of the Callide Mines Union Enterprise Agreement, and so the employees should be covered by the host employment instrument. If approved, the order would lift the pay of the WorkPack production employees to match that of their Batchfire counterparts from the 1st of November of this year. This application will be an important precedent setter for the new legislation, as the MEU promises it to be the first of many such applications. WorkPack maintains that it does not employ the labour hire workers it supplies to mining companies, but rather engages them assignment by assignment as casuals, with no firm advance commitment to a continuing working relationship. so it will test the new definition of casual rules introduced in Casual Loopholes number 2 as well. The FWC President, Adam Hatcher, has already stated that a consultation process will commence for the creation of applicable guidelines on the basis of these early applications. And so the parties are anticipating receiving guidance from the Fair Work Commission on how this application will proceed over the next few weeks. Modern Award Review. Given the unprecedented wave of IR reform that Australian employers are facing at the moment, now may be an appropriate time to spare a thought for the Fair Work Commission, who are tasked with bringing many of these government initiatives into play as part of its Modern Award Review. So what is still to come? The first is worker carers. We've spoken previously about the government's request that the FWC focus on certain key areas arising from the Jobs and Skills Summit, such as promoting job security, simplifying modern awards, and considering how award terms impact workers with caring responsibilities. The FWC has now turned its attention to this third category, worker carers, and has sought submissions as part of the 2023-24 Modern Awards Review as to how the working time provisions in awards and the employment standards influence an employee's ability to balance work with their caring responsibilities. To help guide the consultation process and to promote a discussion on balancing work and care in the context of workplace relations, the FWC has commissioned and released a literature review by Western Sydney University into work and care, which, somewhat unsurprisingly, found that caring responsibilities can have a significant impact on workers' employment, including reduced hours, lower pay, and a limited career progression, and highlighted the importance of workplace policies and practices that support workers with caring responsibilities, such as flexible working arrangements, paid leave, and access to support services. This review, which should be read in conjunction with the Senate Select Committee's report on work and care, made a range of recommendations such as enshrining work from home rights, increasing care leave entitlements, and reviewing access to leave for casuals. In response, the FWC has received 30 submissions from unions and employer groups, which, among other suggestions, challenged the applicability of penalty rates, rest breaks, and hours of work given remote working. The FWC has now entered what should be a highly entertaining consultation phase through to mid-April. The second area of focus is the interplay between the right to disconnect and modern awards. As part of the changes introduced in Closing Loopholes number 2, the FWC is required to insert a right to disconnect term into all modern awards by the 26th of August 2024. FWC staff have identified 11 areas of awards that might impact on the right to disconnect, covering areas such as minimum payment periods, particularly for work outside of regular hours, broken shifts, averaging of hours, overtime, make-up time, and on-call allowances, including clarification of when an employee must be available for work outside of normal hours. The FWC also notes that the new right might affect provisions around maximum daily hours and span of hours clauses by limiting work communications to within this span of hours, as well as necessitate consideration of what is reasonable in the context of after-hours work and availability. A submissions period will be opened up in May to review these changes further. And finally, given the pace of change, some good news. It appeared that a fourth wave of IR reform was about to be launched, with reports earlier this month that the government was preparing to develop portable leave entitlements for insecure workers funded by employer levies. Consultations with unions and employer groups were reportedly due to commence from next month over industry-specific entitlements that could allow workers to carry over annual, sick or long service leave from one job to another. However, in response to these reports, Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke has agreed to requests to delay consultation on a portable entitlements scheme. We note that these changes are deferred only, so it still appears that this will be a topic for future This Month in Payrolls, just not for now. On the 26th of March, we held our Workforce Leaders Forum, featuring the new Fair Work Ombudsman Anna Booth and Deputy Fair Work Ombudsman of Large Corporates and Industrial Compliance Group, Michelle Carey. In this webcast, we discussed the actions employers should be taking to promote a cooperative and compliant workplace in this ever-evolving regulatory landscape. If you missed this event, you can watch the recording on demand. Just scan the QR code on the screen to access this recording. And that's it for the March edition of This Month in Payroll. If you would like to revisit any of our prior updates, they are available on our website at pwc.com.au/payroll. And if you have any questions or need for support, please reach out to myself or your usual PwC contact. Until next time, have a great month in payroll.